Yo, what up guys, Malevolent Being here. We're going to be doing a breakdown of this Hypnotic Techno patch I made a few days ago. A few of you guys have been asking for it, so we'll get into it here, talk about some of the sound design and the sequencing and just kind of how I got this put together here. Before we hop into it, if you haven't already, don't forget to go down below, hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out, takes up like none of your time, and it makes me happy. So beyond that, just let me know what you think down in the comments. Let's get into it here. So we'll just start here. We got the patch set at 126 beats per minute. We'll just start with the kick. So for our kick, we are using the macro oscillator 2 from Audible Instruments on the analog bass drum setting. I got it tuned to just a good complementary tone for the rest of the sound design here. It's got some thump to it, but I still have a pretty sharp transient on it. Nothing too crazy here, it's just a kick drum, right? Moving on, the next sound would be our main bass sound. And so this is an FMOP. Again, just kind of riding out a solid D note. Keep a firm bass. Our trigger is being sequenced by this Euclidean sequencer here. Kind of got this weird triplet or like dotted eighth pattern thing going on. I played with the shift a little bit just to get some nice movement. One thing to note is I do have a sine wave coming out of our ref tone just to supply a modulator to the FM circuit and the FMOP. The end of cycle on this Euclidean sequencer is triggering the feedback on the FMOP that's giving us that little stab at the end of the sequence here. So along with the kick drum, so in addition to the bass, we also have this little accent layer that I made that I'm using the tones from the bass we just looked at to kind of generate. So what I did here was I took our output from our bass, and after sending it just to the mixer, I also sent it through a high-pass filter. And then the high-pass filter is going into a ping-pong delay. You guys have seen me use this ping-pong delay before. I really like it because you can reverse everything in the buffer just by sending triggers to this gnip-gnop setting. So that's pretty fun, and it makes some wild, spacey textures with it. So yeah, we're basically just high-passing that bass, grabbing onto really that accent that triggers at the end of the cycle, and then sending it back into the mixer here. I believe I'm applying some drive to it as well. But when you play it with the bass and the kick, it really expands the track by quite a lot. All right, now before we move into the other melodic or like tonal elements, I have a couple of like noise strike layers here to just again add to the atmosphere and the ambience of the track. It also kind of gives it a stronger sense of movement, if you will. It keeps the track driving forward. So our first noise strike here is coming off of our hat layer that we'll talk more about here in a second, but I'm essentially feeding those hats back into a VCA so we can trigger how much of the sound is going into the effects. And then that's just being sent directly into a high-pass filter and then into a plate reverb that we have the diffusion turned all the way down on. We got some modulation going on the settings here. What it gives you is just this big washed-out sound. And then the other noise layer we have is just a little bit of a different timbre. It's kind of like a call and response, so various noise layers kind of playing off of each other. And so we're just taking that same sound, the filtered hi-hat, and then we're running it into some spectral and granular plugins just to change up the sound. Looks like we're modulating the pitch and whatnot within those. And then again, yeah, we're just triggering it so it's kind of acting as a call and response layer within the patch. But in context of the track, it adds quite a bit of movement. So now we'll talk about the second bass that comes in the track kind of halfway through. This is a much more wide sound, and it really fills out the track. Like, you can definitely tell there's a second part to the track when you listen to it from start to finish. And so this kind of came about as more of just an experiment playing with modules that I don't use too often. In this case, it would be the modal synthesizer from Audible Instruments. And so we're just sending our triggers, again, out of this Euclidean sequencer. Looks like the grid length that's triggering this is 6 steps long. It only has 2 actual hits on it. So you get this nice kind of polymeter effect with the rest of the track. A couple things to note with this sound. I have an LFO modulating the brightness of the module, just to give it some movement, some variation within the sound itself. And then I'm actually running the outputs as a left and a right output through their own high-pass filters. We're using a sample and hold module, Brains by Geodesics, one of my favorite sample and holds. We're just using that to modulate the frequency. And again, it just adds some more movement, and it gives it quite a bit of stereo width as well when you do it that way. So then next we have just our quick hat layer. It comes in towards the end of the track just to add that little extra bit of energy to it to keep driving the idea forward. It's nothing special, just another macro oscillator with the hi-hat circuit. We are modulating the envelope length a little bit just to give it, a little bit more movement. And then we're feeding that through our reverb send effect. We'll talk more about that here in a second, just to add some more space to it. And again, it just kind of drives the energy of the track forward a little more. After that, we kind of just have our 2 elements that are really adding the most atmosphere to the track. It's basically a pad layer and then just like a little synth layer that sprinkles on top. And so we'll just start with the pad layer here. I added this initially to just add some ambience to the track and round out the sound. It sounded pretty one-dimensional, not a ton of stereo information, so it needed a pad. This is just an Audible Instruments resonator. I'm feeding it off of our ping pong high-pass bass from earlier that we talked about. And then we have a walk 2 from Bug Audio. I was modulating the brightness on this as well as the position. And then I'm feeding this through a formant filter. So you get those nice guttural vocal tones as it sort of sweeps across its various modulated parameters. This is also being fed through quite a bit of reverb here. And then our other melodic element here is, again, just our high-pass bass from earlier being fed into yet another delay, some more reverb, just really spreading the sound out. But the sound design of these elements here was more an exercise in coming up with new elements for the patch that didn't add more voices. So we're still just all coming off of this one FMOP bass, and all the variation in the sound you hear in these layers has to do with how we're affecting the effects on said sound. So we're just taking the high-pass signal and completely remangling it to come up with something new to add as a new layer on top of the track. Beyond just those core elements here, we do have some send and return effects, just a reverb and a delay. Pretty standard fare for most music production in 2023, I think. Another thing to note here, I'm creating a sidechain effect basically by feeding the same trigger that's driving the kick into an envelope generator, in this case Rampage, and then we're running it through an attenuverter where we adjust the offset and the attenuation to actually provide a signal that we can throw on the mixer that just sort of ducks the sound or whenever the kick is triggered, essentially. So if you listen to the mix and turn this attenuate, we can open up this attenuator more. So yeah, that's just this envelope being triggered by the clock over here. Same clock that's driving the kick. When you add the kick back in. All right, guys, anyways, that is my Hypnotic Techno patch. If you haven't checked it out already, link is down in the description. Go listen to it. Let me know what you think. If you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will catch you next time. Malevolent being out. Peace.